everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the new album from Eminem, Revival. Oh boy, folks, we got a big one here today. The new album from Eminem. I really don't need to introduce Eminem to you all, I'm guessing, just because he is such a unanimous, massive presence in music. I really don't think I could do justice introducing him. And I've been an Eminem fan for a good amount of time now. To be completely honest, he is one of the artists that really helped get me into hip hop music. But coming into this project, I had a bit of a strange feeling, and that really was that I didn't really feel like I needed a new Eminem album. I really kind of feel like Eminem's story, I guess you could say, kind of ended, I guess, with Recovery to an extent. With his earlier albums being, kind of the classic material, Encore kind of being like the downfall, Relapse kind of being, that attempt at a comeback that wasn't quite, what it should have been, Recovery kind of, making up for that to an extent, but also not being quite that great of a comeback either, but did establish him in a very, popular sort of way. There were lots of songs on that album that did get lots of radio play and lots of, I guess just purchases when it comes to that album. And then, that's kind of where I feel like his story kind of ended. It kind of was, the fall and rise again of Eminem. And then we got Marshall Mathers LP2, which I thought was decent. Even though I didn't really know what to expect from the project in terms of what was next for Eminem, he did deliver with some good, songs on that project. I'm not going to say it was like his greatest album or anything, but there was some good material on that project. But coming off of that, I still wasn't really sure what to expect from a new Eminem album in 2017. Like, what was he gonna do, to push his career in a new direction? What was the next step that he was gonna take? And listening to this album, I gotta say, this might beat out Encore for Eminem's worst album yet. And for the reasons why, it's really a lot of things on this project. Many aspects of this album just fall apart, honestly, when listening to it. And the thing is, the interesting thing about it is, it's not necessarily that they all fall apart at the same time or anything like that. Occasionally on this album, you will get moments of quality, whether it be, a line from Eminem or, a verse or something like that, a flow here or there, that's, quality, an idea or concept for a song that's decent. But at the same time, for every one of those that you get, you have at least 5 bad things going to counteract it that makes this album just a pain to listen to. So where to start with this thing? Well, I should just start with the opening track, Walk on Water, which features Beyonce. I'm not particularly a Beyonce fan or anything. I really don't care for her. I don't hate her or anything. But, I can take her or leave her, I guess. But on this track, honestly, she probably is one of the stronger points on the track and just the album as a whole, just because her voice is pretty solid here. Even if I do feel like the hook is repeated, one too many times maybe throughout the entire song. And on this track, I do like Eminem's lyrics. This is probably the best song on the album, at least in my own personal opinion. He kind of talks about a bit more introspective topics, kind of, examining his place in hip-hop and how he feels he may not be able to top what he's done before and how other people don't expect him to, things of that sort. And it is a kind of interesting startup for an album, especially an album titled Revival. It kind of seems like he's setting himself up, bringing up these doubts that people have in him and his own doubts, and only for him to kind of cast them aside with the rest of the album, kind of prove that he is, one of the greats and he deserves to be respected. Unfortunately, the rest of the album doesn't actually do that. And in the process of doing that, it makes Walk on Water, kind of laughable to sit through upon repeated listens of this album. Like, the first time listening to it, when it was released as a single, and then, of course, going into the album the first time, I'm like, okay, this is all right. But when you hear the rest of the album and how much it's just not good, it makes listening to the track really painful, because while, the song on itself isn't that bad necessarily, just in the context of everything else, it seems almost laughable, because he's talking about how he's pretty much setting himself up to kind of, prove all these doubts wrong, but he doesn't do that on the rest of the project. And it doesn't do the track any favors, to be honest. Like I said, it still probably is one of my favorite tracks on the project, just because it is, solid overall on its own, but in the context of the record as a whole, it doesn't really do all that much that's good. And also, I don't know whose decision it was to start off the album with this slower, more introspective sound. Not necessarily that it can't be done well, but it just doesn't start off the album with a bang, really. Like, I would expect the album to start off with a bit more energy, something that really, hooks you in or anything, or something like that. I mean, the lyrics, they do set up a good concept to be fulfilled by the rest of the album, but it doesn't pay off, and, had this track maybe been a bit more upbeat or something, maybe that could have made up for that fact and make this track a bit more redeemable. But overall, it's just kind of average overall. Alright, moving on to the lyrics now on the project as a whole. I have to say that when it comes to the lyrics on this thing, they're very hit or miss, mostly miss a lot of the times. And I do think Eminem overall, just throughout his career, has been a great lyricist. He's had some great lines, some great songs out there. Of course, he has had misses in the past before. See Encore for that. But here on this album, I just feel like lots of what we get is either just bad or really recycled ideas. Like, there'll be songs where he's talking about his daughter, or his relationships with women, or his relationship with addiction, things of that sort, that we've just gotten so much of from Eminem in the past. And I have, defended him in the past for bringing up these topics again with the excuse that, he's providing a new perspective on these from a new point in his life throughout his career. But he doesn't really do that here on this project. He brings up these similar topics over and over again, but they don't add anything new to the narrative of Eminem as an artist. Like, I don't feel like I learned anything new about Eminem or his relationship with, his ex-wife or his daughter or anything like that. I don't feel like I know any more about that after hearing this project than I didn't already know after hearing his last project. And that just makes it, kind of disappointing. But even that stuff is still a lot better than some of the bad puns and punchlines and things of that sort that you get here throughout the lyrics. Now, Eminem tends to be pretty good in this section when it comes to his lyrics normally, so I'm not really sure what happened here on this project. Just lots of really forced lines, really bad bars throughout this thing. Too many to count, really, but one stood out to me in particular. Now, if you don't mind, if I go over here to my computer to read this one out to you, because I don't want to misinterpret it at all. He says here on the track, Remind Me, he says, "Your booty is heavy duty like diarrhea." The moment I heard that line, I was just done. And this track appears towards like the first half of the album. I was done on my first listen of this thing relatively early into the listening experience. I was just done with, the album pretty much. I just knew this wasn't going to go well overall. And lines like that just really assured it. And you can go into the rest of the songs here on this album, go through the lyrics, and you'll find other lyrics probably of that quality, but I don't have the time to pull those all up now and show them to you. I'm sure it'd be funny, but we don't have that kind of time here. As for Eminem's actual delivery of these lyrics and, raps, it's decent. At times he does have good flows, like I said before, but lots of times they just aren't quite as interesting as they could be. Lots of times he kind of goes for that more battle rap, faster, kind of stuttering type approach that I'm not exactly really big on. I know he's kind of started doing that more recently with his last album, as well as some of the tracks that appeared on that compilation album he released for his label a couple of years ago. Some of the tracks he appeared on that kind of had a similar feel to it. And I was never really a big fan of that type of flow from Eminem. I definitely prefer his older kind of flow from back then, or even like the accent flow from Relapse. I know lots of people didn't like that, but honestly, I didn't care for it all too much, but I didn't hate it really all too much either. I think Relapse is actually kind of underrated as an Eminem album. I know it's kind of a controversial opinion, but it's much better than this album. I think many people could agree on that. And Eminem's flows throughout this thing, they're just, lots of times they don't really stand out all too much. Like I said, he does have his good moments here on this project. I'm not going to deny him that, but it just doesn't seem all too interesting. He doesn't do anything all too crazy, and it's just overall, I guess you could say. As for the performances done by lots of the guest features on this thing, and the guest features, that's another thing about this project that just made me really concerned about this album going into it. When the track list for this project was released with the guest features, myself, as well as many other people, were really concerned for this thing, because there was like no hip-hop artist featured, with the exception of Fresher, I believe, who's, I'm not familiar with his music, that's why I'm not even sure if I'm saying his name right, Fresher, I believe that's it. He's the only hip-hop artist, according to what other people say. He's a hip-hop artist, like I said. I don't know myself, because I'm not familiar with his music at all. But all he does here is a hook on this thing, so it doesn't really matter. Besides from that, there's no, rappers featured here on this project, which is kind of disappointing, because I think Eminem could go really well with some other rappers nowadays, or just even some older rappers that he's been paired up with before in the past. I think that would be fun to see again, but he just brings on a lot of pop artists here. And for the most part, it's just your typical kind of boring pop Eminem hooks that feel like they're right out of the Recovery playbook or something like that. You have of your typical Skylar Grey, you have Pink, and on that song with Pink, it feels more like a Pink song than an Eminem song, or like a shared Pink and Eminem song, because they both have just as much, I guess, ownership of the vocals on that track than any other, the other on the track. You have Beyonce, who I mentioned before, who is actually probably one of the better features. You have Ed Sheeran on the one track he was on, which I don't even want to think about that. The X Ambassadors, which was one of the worst hooks on the album in my opinion, only beaten out by some of Eminem's hooks himself that he does himself. And getting to some of those, I know Eminem has never been the best with his own hooks that he's done before, but this album definitely reaches a new low with some of them. For example, tracks like Framed, which is a track that actually would have been one of the better ones in my opinion, if not for the hook, because the rest of the track kind of has a bit of a more horrorcore, kind of a Relapse feel to it, which, like I mentioned before, I like Relapse as an album, so I was kind of into that, but then he comes in with this awful hook, and it just ruins it. Then you have the track Offended, which just feels like it's trying way too hard to be like an older Slim Shady, offensive Eminem song, if you couldn't tell by the title. And, the verses and stuff aren't, stellar or anything, but it's the hook of this song that really makes it one of the worst, if not the worst song on the album. It just breaks out into this sort of nursery rhyme chanting, like childish sounding thing where he's talking about eating worms and turds or something. It sounds really silly when I say it like that, but it's no more serious sounding in the context of the album, I assure you that. And especially how it transitions from the verses and the rest of the song to this hook. It's just so random and I feel like the transition doesn't work at all. It's just like the song is going and then it's in a completely different direction with this really stupid hook, and then it goes back to what I was doing before, and then it just goes on throughout the entire song, and it's awful. It's not good. I don't like it. The beats and production on this album are another thing that are typically not all that great. Occasionally there are some pretty average moments that, end up being the stronger points of the production on the project, but for many of these tracks he goes for a more rock-oriented sound, which he's done in the past before. In fact, some of his best and biggest songs, like Lose Yourself, Until I Collapse, have, rock-influenced instrumentals, so that's not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. But here, you just have lots of tracks that kind of feel, they kind of go for that rock sound, but they're not as interesting as those songs I mentioned before. They don't have that wow factor that made those tracks good when those were originally released. They just sound a bit boring here in the context of this project. And the samples, like the one track that samples the I Love Rock and Roll track, it just makes me want to go listen to that song instead, because that song is infinitely better than this track that samples it. And I know Eminem has done samples like this before on previous projects, but once again, it sounds so much better on those projects than it does here. It just feels like he lazily kind of steals the hook from that song, implements it into this song, to not only kind of cover the fact that he needs a hook for the track, but also to kind of go with that more rock-oriented beat that just sounds kind of corny. It's not good in my opinion. And then there's also a couple tracks on here that go for a more trap-oriented production style, like the one with Fresher, and as well as, I believe, the track, one of the other tracks that appears earlier on in the track listing. I forgot the name now. And, it's not, a super trap-oriented sound, but I feel like had Eminem gone for, and I'm not a trap music really fan by any means. I just want to get that out of the way now. It's just not really my thing. Though, I feel like had he gone with a more, authentic, I guess you could say, trap-sounding production, I feel like it would have worked better, because at least then it would have been a bit more true to that sound. Whereas here, he kind of takes it and kind of waters it down to fit his own Eminem kind of sound, and it just doesn't really work out doesn't really work out well, in my opinion, I guess. Now, there's one other thing I haven't touched upon with this record yet, and that really is that it is another, a somewhat political album, I guess you could say. I don't want to make it sound like this is the only political Eminem project, because, let's be honest, he's had many political songs in the past, and whether or not people remember them or not, they definitely exist. Just listen to White America from the Eminem Show, just as one of the better examples of that. And here, you could even just tell by the album cover, which has the American flag on it with him, in face palming for whatever reason. As well as if you couldn't tell by that one freestyle he did a couple months back, which got a lot of buzz. I thought it was pretty interesting, but he doesn't really follow up with the same interesting stuff here on this project. It's just typical kind of anti-Trump modern stuff, and I'm not saying I disagree with that stance. I agree with what he's saying here for the most part. The problem is it's just not being presented in a very interesting way. Like, I've heard so many other artists, especially hip-hop artists, cover these same exact subject matters a lot better on albums that they've released in the past year already that I've reviewed on my channel. Eminem just goes for a lot of really basic stuff that you expect pretty much. It's just, imagine Eminem covering, American politics in 2017 the most generic way possible. That's pretty much what you're getting here. And it kind of disappointed me, given that that freestyle he did. I really liked on that how he called out, his white fans and he acknowledges the fact that he has a large white fan base that many other hip hop artists don't necessarily have, and he kind of makes them question their own politics and things of that. I like that aspect of that freestyle that he had. I hoped he'd bring an interesting perspective like that here onto this album as well, but he doesn't really. He just delivers a very painfully generic message on the tracks here that try to be political. And the ones that don't, like I said, retread a lot of similar ground to the lyrical themes that he's tackled in the past before. And it also, just some of the things don't really add up well. I know this is a bit of more of a random lyrical complaint, but the one track with the ex-ambassadors, where he's kind of talking about how could he be like a great father but like a bad like husband, it kind of seems, like I guess a humble brag of sorts. Like, he's kind of putting himself down in the one thing, but he's at the same time, bragging about being a great father. Like, it's just a little awkward, honestly. I see what he's going for, but I think it could have been executed a lot better, to be completely honest, than being so, on the nose with that message of sorts. The last couple of tracks that appear on this project, where he's getting a bit more personal, talking about his daughter and stuff, I think are actually two more of the better tracks that you get here in the track listing, as far as better tracks get on this thing. The unfortunate thing about these tracks is, one, they're not super interesting in the context of Eminem's career as a whole. They're not, like, songs that I feel like you definitely need to listen to if you're an Eminem fan. Like, scrap all the other tracks on the album. If you gotta listen to any tracks, listen to those two. Nah, like, you could skip those tracks as well. You're not gonna miss much. And also the fact that you have to get through the rest of the album, to get to those two tracks, that makes it such a pain. Honestly, with the exception of the first track, which, like I said, is kind of decent overall. So really, it doesn't really work, in my opinion. The album is far too long for you to get to those last two tracks, and by the time you get there, you just want the experience to be done already. And that's another point. This album is way too freaking long. It's like 1 hour and 17 minutes. If this thing was 30 minutes long, it would still be too long, because like I said, not even halfway through this thing, I just wanted it to be over with already, because the amount of just bad stuff going on here just wanted me to just hit the stop button on this and just not review it even, because I would have gained a lot more free time in my life that could have been spent listening to something a lot more enjoyable than this. But unfortunately, I'm committed, and here we are with the review now. 19 tracks, just way too much. I know technically 2 of those are more like interlude tracks, so really it's more like 17 tracks, but still, way too long. This could have been cut down. Shouldn't have been more than 1 hour at most, in my opinion. And I do acknowledge the fact that some of Eminem's other albums had this similar problem to them, but here it's especially painful given all the other bad stuff that I had mentioned before. Sitting through this thing, I was just constantly checking, going and clicking to see the track list to see was this thing almost over, and every time I was just more disappointed, because no, I'm only a quarter of the way through the album, or I'm only halfway through the album, or I'm only 3/4 of the way through the album. It just seems like this thing never ends, and that's the worst part. It's not like an album that you never want to end because it's so good. It's the opposite, honestly. So overall, Revival by Eminem, it's not a good album, and this is coming from an Eminem fan. Like I said before, I've liked all of his projects before, really, to some extent, really, with the exception of Encore. But at least with Encore, there was a couple tracks on there that I enjoy, like Toy Soldiers and Mockingbird, for example, amongst maybe a couple others that I don't remember off the top of my head. And at least with that album, it was kind of a, some of the tracks at least were like a so bad it's funny kind of deal, where you could listen to them and at least kind of laugh at how ridiculous they are. Not the case with this album. This album isn't a so bad it's good album. Even the lines here that are kind of like bad. They're not really a laugh out loud kind of bad. There's kind of a more like a cringe or a facepalm kind of bad. In fact, I think I facepalmed twice while listening to this thing the first time through, like legitimately, not like I'm not like an exaggerated thing. Like I legitimately like facepalmed when listening to it because I was just so done. In fact, I think one of those instances was with that diarrhea line I brought up earlier. So yeah, this thing definitely, at least in my own opinion, Eminem's low point for his career so far. I'm not exactly sure what went on here because, like I said, he's kind of been doing a bit better recently after Encore. Kind of, Marshall Mathers LP2 wasn't particularly bad in my opinion. So I'm not sure what happened here. Maybe there was just a lack of ideas, and he just wanted to put out an album because he felt like he had to. Maybe the political aspect influenced him to put out an album that maybe didn't need to be said at this point because already enough artists had already said that stuff. Maybe he just felt like I don't know. I have no idea, honestly. This thing wasn't good. If you're an Eminem fan, you're probably going to listen to this anyway. You probably heard it already anyway, so there's not much I could do for you there. But if you're a hip-hop fan, if you're a casual Eminem fan, and you want to know if you should check this out, don't, honestly. It's not worth your time. It's not going to impress you. Even the best tracks on here are average at best, and they're not going to do much for you. And as far as whether or not Eminem should put out another album in the future, which is something I have been thinking to myself over the past few days while listening to this thing, I don't know. I kind of hope that he could put out another album that redeems him after this. But at the same time, I just kind of fear that the next album could be this level of quality, if not worse. But yeah, hopefully, I know I'm not alone in this thought and thinking this way about this album. So hopefully, the negative reaction might spark a bit of a change, and maybe we'll get a better album next time around, because this project, like I said, excuse me, this album's so bad it's making me sick, but yeah, it's not good. Wouldn't recommend it. But overall, that was just my own opinion. Feel free to have your own. If you love this thing, I really don't care. Feel free to love it. Feel free to hate it. Feel free to feel indifferent about it. Feel free to not listen to it. I really don't care at this point. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future album reviews, as well as other music-related content. We're going to have my year-end list coming up soon, end of December, early January, and I don't want you guys to miss out on those, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we're going to, have a fantastic, fun time at the end of this year. A lot more fun than listening to this thing, at least. Comment down below your thoughts on the project. Follow me on all the social medias I have linked in the description down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.